This is the Veterinary Project Podcast, episode 091.
Welcome to the show created by vets featuring absolutely no pets. This is the Veterinary Project Podcast, hosted by Dr. Michael Bugg and Dr. Jonathan Leicht. Our resident veterinarians have swapped out their stethoscopes in favor of microphones to bring you the Veterinary Project Podcast, a show focused on real conversations, aimed to connect this amazing profession full of remarkable people. Through the sharing of collective stories and wisdom, and connecting over the many unique challenges we face, we invite you to join our community of veterinary professionals leading intentional lives. And now, here are the hosts of the Veterinary Project Podcast, Dr. Michael Bugg and Dr. Jonathan Leicht.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Another conversation here on the Veterinary Project Podcast. I know you guys all want another episode about nothing, but we actually have some concrete stuff to dive into today. Before we get into that, how you doing, Jonathan?
I am doing well, and it sounded like you were yelling at the microphone there, so I am quite encouraged by your energy on that intro. You're trying to step it up one above me now. I like it.
Got the volume cranked. So
you sure do.
We are gonna dive in to some information and just sort of what we're seeing on the ground and more what you're seeing on the ground, given that you're so involved in multiple areas of the veterinary industry around pricing. Yeah. Because unless you are living under a rock, you have noticed that the cost of absolutely everything is dramatically increasing and at a rapid rate.
There is some pretty crazy numbers out there right now for North America and beyond. If we look at energy pricing, price of stable goods, price of, inputs in the agricultural sector, and therefore how that's translated into veterinary medicine, it is shocking in some cases. So yes, we're going to chat a little bit about how that is actually influencing veterinary medicine in a manner that I've never seen in my career to date. And I think we are all, and we being the veterinary industry as a whole, are we trying to react to it as best as possible? So we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah, just sort of playing off what you just said there. What is interesting about inflation is it is reactive because all inflation numbers are reported backwards, right? Like you can only report on it by looking back. And then we have to take sort of a guess about what is going to happen in the future. So in a way, as we respond to inflation, we're always playing catch up because you don't know the numbers until we can look back on a month. So what are you seeing, I guess, in the veterinary industry? So I know you have mixed animal experience and small animal. So across those spectrums, what are you seeing maybe product and service pricing wise?
I'm going to back it up a little bit for everybody because inflation, even in itself, the definition of inflation is very specific sometimes to the metrics that are used. So you are hearing percentages across the board right now. Inflation's at 8.3%, 10%, 12%. In the UK, I heard as high as 40%. But again, unless you are defining what metrics are used to set that percentage, it can be misleading. So I did find a general term, and this is a general term without going into specifics. Inflation, the steady rise of prices for goods and services over a period. And it has many effects, both good and bad. Inflation erodes purchasing power and how much of something can be purchased with a current currency. So much to unpack right there.
Yeah.
We're going to try and keep it specific to the veterinary business now, as opposed to going into currencies, changing dynamics in the world, etc. Let's keep it to just flat North America. We've been printing money like crazy over the last 3 years. Now we have rising interest rates. Now we have inflation. And what is that doing in our space? Yeah. What that's doing in our space, Mike, before I jump there, I see you starting to breathe.
Well, I was just like to layer on to this is higher level now. And this may be very basic for some of the listeners, but essentially what's got us in these situations, obviously you had mentioned all the printing of money, but long story short, there is too much money chasing too little supply of stuff. And then all of these various inflation metrics, the stuff, can be a basket, and they can pick and choose what they put in that basket. And that can be very misleading, because you will see inflation reported currently in the high single digits. And I would argue everyone is feeling that is inaccurate, because inflation, more realistically, to run a household, to buy food, to buy gas, maybe you're going to buy a vehicle or two like Jonathan did, the cost of that is far more than a single digit increase. So that's where it can be misleading. And then the erosion of purchasing power is basically, if you had $100 last year and you went and tried to fill your grocery cart, you got a certain amount. You try to do that again with that same $100 today, you are going to get far less.
Yeah. So your purchasing power has decreased. And yet at the same point, when we were doing for this recording, it's very interesting that in this current dynamic, which is affecting the veterinary industry, interest rates are still very low in the big picture, which means that individuals, corporations, governments, etc., they need to put their cash somewhere, because by keeping their cash on the side, they're actually losing money. They're losing percentages. And so therefore they want to distribute their cash. They need to get it into markets that are going to make a better return than what interest rates are providing for. So you have a double whammy there. And there is a complex system, which is leading to all of us having to pay more for less. And it is quite complex. So now we have the governments that are going to be increasing interest rates to try and deaden or decrease inflation, and they tend to pendulum swing it too far. So then we're going to lead into increased interest rates, which then has a chance of recession and all of the other fallouts that happen as a result of it, which truthfully need to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's unsustainable if you spiral into hyperinflation.
Yep.
That's where you see things like Zimbabwe, Venezuela, where
Brazil.
Money literally is blowing down the street and no one bothers to pick it up because it's worthless.
Yes.
So anyway, let's
go in there.
Well, let's narrow in.
Yep.
Veterinary clinic. What are you seeing around pricing? Where are things heading kind of in real time? This is May 2022.
Yes. So in May 2022, no different than any other year, when you're an employer, you're looking at your cost of goods and you're determining, as a percentage of your gross revenue, what does it cost to bring in the supplies that are needed in order to either perform a professional service or to sell in regards to any of the pharmaceuticals we use, the food, etc., in a day-to-day veterinary clinic. And what we saw starting in December and then moving into the early year was massive increases on our retail side. We saw communications and notifications coming out to us that our retail partners especially were going to be taking double-digit increases. We're providing double-digit increases in their pricing in 2022 as a measure of what they were seeing on their back end in terms of ingredients to put into these products. And then number two, because of COVID, they had held back from making increases in some fashion and form over the last 2 years, and they now needed to recuperate. We are used to increases in the range of, depending on the year, sometimes 2.5% up to, in extreme scenarios, 7%. When you get a piece of paper that says your price for this retail item that you use a lot of is going up by over 10%, that is a big shot. And that's a shot that has hit the bows of every single veterinary clinic in North America, because all of a sudden you need to budget for a 10% increase right away within usually 60 days. And that's on the communications that are provided to us. Sometimes they come after the fact, depending on the company, or sometimes they actually say they're going to do one and then it has to be another because they have ingredient supply issues behind the scenes, which we know is an issue in May 2022, and we don't get much notice on it. So all of a sudden you're looking at a cost of goods that maybe you're at 25%, and all of a sudden you're looking at 32% plus.
Yeah.
That is a drastic change, which has occurred in all of our veterinary practices in 2022.
Okay. So just to spell this out a little more, Jonathan, cost of goods, when you're looking at your P&L, what would be a normal metric? So you had said 25 and bumping up to 30. Would that and we don't need to be dead on this. This is a big picture number, but that's for a veterinary clinic owner is sitting down, looking at their P&L, cost of goods floating around 25%. Is that a fair range, or what would the range be?
So first two things, P&L is a profit and loss statement, of which recognizes your income statement. So how much revenue you're bringing in, and then all the expenses that fall underneath it to determine what you're actually making in terms of dollars and cents on a month by month basis. That's what we're referring to by P&L. The secondary is on a cost of goods. It makes up the second largest expense in your P&L outside of payroll on any given month. So your payroll, and we've talked about that in past episodes, your cost of goods can, and again, it's dependent on the structure of your clinic. If you're a specialty, it's going to be different than a GP, which is going to be different than a mixed animal. So it's hard for me to give specifics, because if I give specifics, they're going to be wrong. Let's use a general overview of anything between, let's go as low as 22, that'd be pretty amazing, to as high as 35, 40. Again, that's a big variance, but I want to keep it that wide.
Yeah. So just working this through as we now look at the individual clinic and then eventually the pricing that gets passed on to the end client. What you're basically saying is, say, take December 2021. Let's say you were running at a 25% cost of goods, and now May 2022, that has jumped up and you're sitting somewhere in the 30 some percentages, just as an example.
As an example. Correct.
So the
delta
clinic
has changed 5, 6, 7 points overnight, because there's some that have jumped up double digits. There's some that have jumped up 5%. And there's some, that haven't jumped up for whichever reason. Maybe you pre-bought. There's lots of clinics, depending on your region, where they've pre-purchased, where you have internal parasiticides and large animal products. And, there's lab where, the suppliers recognized what was happening and gave an opportunity to vet clinics to take advantage of some deals at the end of 2021.
Yeah.
That's only going to hold you now for so long.
I know. And so just a quick zoom out for more context for the listener, various industries. I follow the stock market closely. You have companies like Target and Walmart that have recently reported earnings, and they reported, record revenues, but their stock price has been absolutely decimated because their cost is skyrocketing. Right. So you're seeing this on just massive multi-billion-dollar companies across the board. I'm in Saskatchewan. My family is a farming family. And then on the radio, they were talking about costs of farming here. This will be the most expensive crop input year ever. And Saskatchewan represents roughly 50% of cultivated land in Canada. So this is a farming province. When you look at costs across the board, like fertilizer, machinery, everything sky high. So now we got to follow that trend. That is what it costs to produce the crop. The farmer has to recover that. Commodity prices are high. Now the pet food company that needs to buy those inputs, sky high. So now we wrap around back to the vet clinic. When Jonathan goes to order food to put on his shelves, his cost of goods have now gone from 20 something up to 30 something because of that whole loop.
That's correct. And to add to it, many companies during COVID in the veterinary space did not take price increases. So they held back because of what was going on. And they were trying to maintain either their market dominance, or they were trying to maintain their loyalty, or they were going, I'm going to eat some of that margin to the benefit of their veterinary clients, and therefore the veterinary clinic's clients to hold through. They now have to catch up because their bosses, oftentimes in the public market, have now said, you need to carry that through, because we keep seeing it quarter over quarter over quarter. And that's now affecting us at the veterinary clinic, whether you're a small, mixed, or large animal practice. And that is just compounded on top of this inflation number.
Okay. So let's carry that through now. So you as a clinic owner are handed these notices, your prices are going up. Yeah. How are you handling that and passing that on to your clients, or what are you doing there and what are you seeing in the industry?
Yeah, this is the tough part. And this is where I'm going to be general and get specific where I can. Normally in a veterinary practice, and again, this is dependent on region, location, setup. There are different styles of veterinary practices. On average, we would do a price increase as a general rule across the board, minus some shoppables. We'll talk about that. And I'm being very open here. Once a year, sometimes twice a year. And those percentages would vary. They'd be pretty standard. 1 to 3, sometimes 5%, depending on, again, region, location, type of practice, all the rest of it. This year, in multiple instances with practices that I run and operate and others, we will be doing 2 increases or even potentially further that are of a higher percentage than normal, because we have to, because that margin has eroded so much so, in some cases, to then come into question for those clinics' sustainabilities, and or from a cost perspective, ensuring that I can continue to cover off the number one cost to our clinic, which is payroll. Yeah. And therefore, for every point that we hold back, that's a double point, because I need to increase payroll as a measure of inflation again. Have to ensure we're paying our employees appropriately and as much as we can from an economic standpoint, which means that margin just decreases and decreases and decreases. And there's a compounding effect in mixed and large animal, because inflation leads to increased prices of gas, increased prices of distribution, increased prices of everything associated with what is a lot of what we do in mixed and large animal practice. It just compounds even further. Yeah. So as a result of that, those professional shoppable services, we have to raise them, which hits the farmer even more.
And so let's just drill into that quickly. So when you say shoppable services, are you referring to things that clients pick up the phone, call around, get 3 prices from 3 different vet clinics? Hey, my dog, I need to spay my dog. Give me a quote.
That's correct. That's correct. The shoppables, those specific services, and they tend to be professional services where if there's anything that people are going to look around for, it's going to be those exact things: spays, neuters, sometimes dental, sometimes x-rays. It's very dependent on the region and location. Mm-hmm. Yeah. On the large animal side, preg checks, semen testing, those types of professional services. And there's only so high you can go as well too. And we all know that. Like there's a level to all of this that says this is no longer sustainable. And I'm not sure what that level is right now in veterinary medicine, because this is a conversation I had in my prior life in specialty medicine from its vertical integration from the ER, moving into tertiary care, being a specialist, into the lab that's also included. There's only so high that level of pricing can go out to a client before they say, enough's enough. I can't afford this. Mm-hmm. And I had already thought we'd hit that level in past life. The inflationary pressures here with interest rates going up as well too. I'm not sure where this goes.
Man, I have so many questions here and so many tangents to go on. So one question, this is a whole conversation in the veterinary industry. Every vet clinic and every veterinarian we talk to is fully booked across the board. So my counter argument to say there's only so high, and again, I am not a business owner, so I may sound ridiculous with this comment.
That's great. I know where you're going.
If you do not have an unbooked appointment slot, could you not make the argument that there's room to raise your price? So I'm coming from the real estate world, and the argument in the real estate world would be if your vacancy is 0%, your rents are too low.
It's not as cut and dry in the vet world, I don't think. In the city, it's easier that way because I think there's a little bit of less elasticity to pricing. It's a little bit more inelastic, meaning people are going to come no matter the price. That is not the same in different regions, and that's not the same in rural mixed animal practice. I can say that now a couple of years in. Mm-hmm. there's only so far people can go. And if you have an opening in your slot, you're still providing services behind the scenes in the lab and the x-ray and the dentals that might not show itself in a wellness exam up front. There's still a lot of work happening in those practices, and there's only so far you can go with rising prices. Again, I don't know what that level is.
Yeah.
And we're working on it by region basis. I also want to bring up the fact, and I hear this well, those margins should decrease because it's the veterinary owners that are making the most money. Maybe that's the case. I haven't seen it as an employer and owner. And I also will say that it's the employer that's taken on the risk. It's the employer that's taken on the interest associated with a loan to get that business practice started. And there is a cost to that. And there should be a return on that. And we're trying to hold that return. And the return is decreased in many places.
Yeah. And just another tangent, interest cost on debt is dramatically rising. So, I mean, I am very in tune with that in the real estate space. And so just mentioning that on a business loan, now, yes, you can fix those over a term, over a period of time, but those terms come due and then they have to be renewed, and on renewal, you could be looking at a shockingly higher interest rate than what you had previously.
That's correct. That's why they're all interconnected, right?
Yeah.
Inflation and what we're seeing here and the steady rise of prices and goods and services, the government only has a couple of tools that they can utilize to bring down inflation. One of those major tools is raising interest rates, because hopefully that then drops down demand and therefore then brings up supply, which then leads to a better balance of supply demand. We are nowhere near there right now. So I completely agree with you. I expect multiple interest charge increases to all of our businesses, which will then therefore also impact my bottom line. And I need to be cognizant of that. We have lots of bills to pay.
Absolutely. Okay. So, I mean, we're wanting to keep this one kind of short. I have a few more questions. Yeah. How are you seeing this? Like, how is this received by the client at the clinic level, where, I mean, all around them, they can see that prices have increased. Their gas price to drive to the clinic costs more. If they grabbed a Starbucks on the way, it costs more. They sit down at the vet clinic for their annual vaccines and they remember that last year it costed X, but this year it costs more. How are they receiving that when they go to pay their bill?
It's an interesting dynamic right now. It's not received well a lot of times, saying it frankly. But that being said, it's also a little bit easier than at other times because they know that all around them prices are also increasing. When we used to do price increases in the vet space, and you did anything above 4 or 5%, you got a lot of flack. And as a result of that flack, you needed to, and I've learned this over time, make sure that your communication is clear, effective, proactive, and even then knowledgeable that your front end team who carries the burden of that most of the time, they need to be set up for success. And that's a whole different podcast we could go into. In this inflationary area right now, this is so hard to say, but it is the truth. So I'm going to say it's a little bit easier right now because everybody around is also increasing prices.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I've heard that in a lot of the economic communities I follow and am in, and there is very much this sort of inflation. It's like, I don't want to say a free pass, but every industry it's like they're doing it, we're doing it, because you can't get caught behind on this. Because
we already are. We're 2 years of COVID behind.
Yes, I see. Yes, I agree. What I'm meaning by caught behind is like, if everyone is now raising prices and you don't, and and this is where like now we can get into, I mean, I get it on the sympathy side of things, because at the end of the day, we have a client and we have a patient.
Yeah.
And there's not a veterinarian that I've ever met that doesn't want to help that patient.
Yep.
And so I can understand the emotional side of this, where we're seeing these prices just skyrocketing. And we know, unfortunately, ultimately, there could be patients that suffer as pricing prices those clients out of service.
Yep. we are also an open market, which I love. We are an open business market, and there are individuals and entrepreneurs and individuals that see that as an opening to be able to provide care in a different way and in a different method. Then it also leads to innovation in the marketplace, and veterinary medicine is no different right now. And that to me excites me, which means that, hey, maybe the traditional model needs a shakeup. And as a result of this and all the other pressures in veterinary medicine, new things are able to flourish or be incubated and flourish.
Yeah, it is. I don't know. It's unfortunate to say, but it's also excellent in that you're totally right. Like these pressure times generally create a new way of doing things, which will be deflationary on the expense side, right? Like, and usually it's technology comes along and can find an efficiency somewhere so we can deliver a product or service at a lower cost, and that can be great for everyone.
Yep.
But it takes this pinch of like, oh, wow, we have to figure this out to create the urgency to develop it. But
I agree with you.
Okay. I got one more hard question for you, Jonathan, and we didn't really prep on this. How do you manage this? Because you said cost of goods, second largest expense line item behind only number one, which is cost of labor, which is the people in veterinary medicine. So as a clinic owner or in operations, for a group of clinics, how do you balance that where you don't have direct control over cost of goods? As you said, the supplier is kind of like, these are going to be the pricing, take it or leave it. And, you need those drugs on your shelf to service your clients and patients. But how do you handle the people side of this that are feeling it at home, and obviously everyone wants a wage increase. So how do we skate through that?
You recognize the balance of both. So on inventory, when all is flying well in the world, you're making lots of money at home, you stock your shelves with fancier stuff, you stock your shelves with more. You're not as concerned if you've got 5 types of cereal on the shelf as compared to 3. It's the same thing in veterinary medicine. When times are good, what slips? Cost of goods, white goods, the amount that's in your shelves. And it just slips over time. And it's because you're focused on other things. You're focused on revenue. You're focused on your people. You're focused. Right now is the time to focus on inventory. Right now is the time to focus on who do you have as partners on your inventory side. And you want to drill down to those partners and ensure that you have a great relationship with them so you can get the best deal possible, which means you're probably going to have to drop some other partners. And you need to get really efficient with what you're carrying on your shelves, how little you're carrying on your shelves to be able to run your day-to-day, still meet the needs of your clients so that money is kept with the distributor and not out of your pocket. So then you can use more of that money because you only have so much of it for your people. If you get that right, it makes it way easier to deal with the people person portion because you do have still money left in the bank to spend on what your most important part of your business is, which is your people. That's my answer to it. And that is not easy to do because sometimes it's a change of habits because we've had it good in veterinary medicine for so long. And we really have on the cost of goods side, that's changing. So better get your cost of goods figured out and do it really well. That's a really good way to make it so you've got money in the bank to help your people, which is first and foremost.
Wow, Jonathan, I got to fire more of these at you. That was great. That was a good answer and I threw that at you out of left field. We weren't planning on going into that here.
It's the real.
Yeah.
It's cost of goods is important, but it's the first thing to slip when everything else is looking gold. I've seen it over and over and over again.
Yeah. And it is like zooming out, just take personal households. I mean, obviously COVID, I hate saying things were good because there was like a health crisis.
Yep.
But in terms of finances, there was an abundance of sort of loose cash around, and it's easy to let, the personal budget slip. All of a sudden we're spending money on everything. And this is interesting. This is when you look at what central banks are trying to accomplish as they raise rates, there is psychology that comes into play here. I mean, it is working because when you go to the gas pumps and I think here we're like $1.80 something a liter. If you're listening in the States, 1 liter, you have to multiply that by 4 to get to gallons.
Yeah.
So, I mean, who knows? We're $6, $7, $8 a gallon for gas. And it plays with your mind where it's like, okay, are we going to take that road trip?
Yeah.
No, let's just stay home. Right. So this is all part of that tapering that is playing out, where we're trying to slow some of that demand because the supply hasn't been there to meet it. So
agreed. Yep. No, this is the stuff that in my view makes or breaks veterinary medicine, and there's so many other aspects of it as well. This is just one small but very important piece of it.
Absolutely. And it is cool, Jonathan. Obviously we chat all the time, watching, like, we did not have a class on this in vet school back when we went through in whatever 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right. This is stuff you got to learn on the ground, from someone that's done it, that mentors you and shows you this is real life of how it plays out.
Agreed. Yep. The bills need to get paid.
Okay. Right on. Well, as we wrap this up, I'm gonna give the final comment on this to you, because I mean, you're just so into it. You live this day in, day out in multiple segments of the industry. So I guess last word on this whole sort of inflation, rising price debacle, we'll call it, to the vet industry.
I think briefly, it's recognizing the reality of where we're at. And we are, in essence, being a little bit reactive to what was foreshadowed over the last year and a half with the amount of printing that has happened in the economy across the world. What we can do in the veterinary business is really look at our input costs. So what does it take to run a veterinary practice? If you can get really good and efficient on those ends, at the end of the day, you'll be able to pay your bills still in veterinary medicine, and then keep that money towards being able to pay your employees and the team and support and all the other aspects that we need to focus on in veterinary medicine. So if you are running and operating your business well from this small end, it makes a big difference on the other end.
Thank you for listening to the Veterinary Project Podcast. As a recap, on behalf of our hosts, the Veterinary Project Podcast will be releasing new episodes weekly, so be sure to tune in as we bring you more conversations aimed at helping you enjoy a life well lived. If you enjoyed what you heard on the show and you want to stay in the know, please like, love, and or subscribe to the podcast on the listening platform of your choosing, as we're available on all the usual suspects. If you know of others that may benefit from these conversations, we'd love it if you please share the show with them, as this will help us grow our community to reach more and more veterinary professionals. Speaking of which, if you are a veterinary professional and would like to get connected with more like-minded individuals who are joining us on this journey, please send an email to the veterinaryprojectpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll invite you to be a part of our private Facebook group. General feedback, requests for information, or perhaps requests to be a guest on the show can also be sent to the veterinaryprojectpodcast@gmail.com. Dr. Michael Bugg and Dr. Jonathan Leicht, thank you for listening to the show, and we'll catch you again next week for another episode of the Veterinary Project Podcast. Bye for now.